When you are triggered, it is always an old memory that is popping up and that is creating the film. Because we all know that, right? When we are triggered, we go into a loop. It's always the same story that unfolds, you know? And until it's not finished, you don't start to reason. You cannot start to reason. You don't identify only with your little story in the moment when you're wounded, but you are able to look at things in many, many different ways. And you know that there is something beyond. There's always somebody that you can lean on. There's always the others that hold you. There's a solidarity net that holds you. How do you value that?
Welcome to Reborn to Live, a podcast in which we explore new ways of living and being consciously together to discover the deeper aspects of life, of ourselves, and of the future of humanity, so that we can reborn into a new era, into our highest version of ourselves, and experience this wonderful journey of life fully. Welcome back to another episode of the Reborn to Live podcast. I am here today with a very special person, with Macaco. She has been living in my community in Damanhur for 30 years. She has been traveling all over the world, working with conflict resolution, with community building, with healing trauma. And she has been the president for the Global Ecovillage Network-Europe, NGO, for many years. And so we're here today to speak about intentional communities and all your experience, because there's a lot of people interested in this topic and how to create your own. What is the difficulties? What is the pros? What is the cons? And how can that contribute to a better world?
Of course, I love this theme. I love this topic. It's one of my favorites.
Yes.
So.
You've dedicated a big part of your life to this.
I
also
did.
So first of all, before we start, how do you define intentional communities for the people who are listening and perhaps have, the co-living, intentional communities, eco-villages? How do you define these kind of concepts?
Well, an eco-village can be many things. An eco-village can be both a co-housing as well as an intentional community. In an intentional community, usually there are people who gather together around an ideal and want to live together according to principles, but also trying to achieve their ideal. And I have seen that the communities that have lived longer and longest actually do have very, 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 very high ideals. So it looks like it needs to be something that is almost not reachable, but always there, and you can always get closer, like a polar star.
Yes, a polar star, the sun. Yes. And how does that help in the community? Like in which way is that so crucial?
It's so crucial because living together is not easy. Living together really touches upon all your traumas. It touches all your buttons. It really, it is in the same time the most enriching thing that I can think of, but also the most difficult. Because it is as if time in intentional communities becomes much faster, because you have so many interactions continuously with so many people, and they really touch upon your traumas. Because we all are traumatized people. We come from societies that have been traumatized for thousands and thousands of years. And we can look at that just also, we don't have to have the big traumas with a big T, but just the small traumas, which are the development traumas, where our mothers did not have really the time to really dedicate us, to see us, to give us the energy that we would have needed when we were small, and the understanding. So we all have big wounds, and these wounds are really touched upon when you live together. Because, one thing for sure, that when you are triggered, it's always an old memory of an old trauma.
Of course.
And you represent a situation and you recreate a situation. So this is why living in community is in the same time very challenging, but also extremely enriching, because you have the possibility to really look at your things, to really harmonize these parts inside of you that are not harmonized, to bring into light talents that you would not bring otherwise in other situations, because the other people, they are like millions of or hundreds of mirrors,
Yeah.
and they all show you parts, and we all can look at each other in the mirror in front, and maybe
Yeah.
we see a little bit when we look at the sides,
Yes.
but behind we don't see anything.
Yeah.
The others do.
Yeah. This is something that I've heard that many people have asked me also as living in a community, that it requires people, both the people who are mirroring you, but especially yourself, because in the end you can only take responsibility for who you are and how you respond and how you act, to be very conscious about this. So it requires a process of being conscious and not, just getting triggered, but also allowing to actually see what that is, and instead of just responding, but being responsible of who you are. And how do you see, because you have been traveling in between so many different communities where you have seen different like polar stars. I know that some eco-villages don't really have either like an ideal, a big ideal. How do that work? Like, what do you see works the most to make people conscious within a community?
I think to make people conscious, it has to do a lot. First of all, I think, as you said, with taking responsibility for your own feelings, taking responsibility for your own things, and not blowing your frustration continuously on people, So that's something that is very difficult. But I think that the part to become conscious is very much linked to having also an approach to life that sees life in its wholeness, and that is in harmony with nature, because we are nature, and we have to live in harmony with nature, because nature is a great teacher in many, many ways. So I think really being able to look at life with a lot of respect, because life is what characterizes our whole world. It's life that makes the difference. So to be conscious about the sacredness of life on the one side, and on the other side really to explore life in all its expressions, or in all its harmonious expressions. And I think that is something that and also really personally, of course, I live in a spiritual community, so I do believe that there is much more than what we just see. So I do believe that there is a spirituality, that there's a whole field, that there's a whole realm of energetical forces that you can give any kind of name that you like. So, but I'm sure they are. So, and I feel that they are, and I can see also the divine in other people. So the beauty, the uniqueness, the unique expression of life in that specific person, it's so beautiful. And so I think becoming conscious really means a lot of things. It means to become conscious about your own things that are in the shadow, to look at the things that creates harmony and connections, because also we cannot become, I think that's a little bit different. I don't think that we can become really conscious just living on our own. I think we have to have this exchange with other people and the connectedness, because life becomes beautiful and becomes meaningful when we have connections. So it's all about connections. And it's all about connections between human beings, between humans and animals, between humans and the plant world.
Of course.
And, and between humans and also the stone world, because it's all alive.
This is a very indigenous also concept. I know that many indigenous tribes have this sense of me and all my relationships, which is not only with humans, but with my relationship with the river, my relationship with the stars, my relationship, and knowing how to nourish and knowing how to embrace that and knowing how to be in relationship with that. And I also love the fact that you say with connection, this is an exercise that even though I've been living now for almost 10 years in this community, it was when I became a mother 3 years ago, I started doing this exercise with what fosters most connection. Because especially with a child, you are having a little person who is constantly triggering you a lot. And so, but really in the response, and this helped me also a lot in how to respond to people within the community, because in the end, just as you say, we're all small traumatized people, children in a grown-up body, and you see that a lot when you're in a community. And seeing how can I respond in a way that creates connection. Is my response now creating more separation, or is it creating connection, and going beyond the fact of am I right or not?
Exactly.
But just looking at the fact what creates connection. And
Exactly.
if you're not able to do that in a moment, and that happened to me only last night, I was not able to do it. But afterwards, when breathing, going and creating that connection, asking for that forgiveness, and being closer again. And I think that is really, like, for me, that has been something that is important in community. Like, okay, connection, not what is right or
exactly.
wrong.
Yeah. And this also it reminds me of a concept that we have in Damanhur that I've always really loved a lot, which is the concept of the quasi-real.
Yes.
So what does that mean? It means that there's no thing existing as reality. It always is a perception through our filters. And our filters are given by how we grew up, what are the traumas that we got, what are the experiences, which culture did we grow in, how are we feeling today, what is our life. Is our life good to us in the moment or not? And all this creates a filter. And through this filter, you view reality. So there is no reality existing. So this old paradigm of being right or wrong, which always only creates conflict, always only, and there's always a winner and a loser. So it is never beautiful. And it is never beautiful, even if you win on the long run, it's not beautiful. Yeah. Because you feel there's something wrong. Yeah. So we have to get out of this old paradigm. And with the idea of the quasi-real and conflict resolution, Damanhurian style is really also becoming aware that my quasi-real is not better than your quasi-real. They are both true. And it's not more true. They are both true. And if they're both true, there's no reason to go like this. We have to look for the new possibility. Yeah. We have to look for something that works for the two of us. Yes. And this is exactly what you just said, you know?
This is beautiful. It's going from compromise to co-creation.
Exactly.
Because compromise, there's a lose-lose. But co-creation, there is a win-win because you see new possibilities.
Exactly.
I love that concept.
Yeah.
And so you have also just come back from Kenya. You have been working a lot also in Africa both with leadership and with bringing community. And how has that experience been? Because the culture there is very, as you said also in the beginning, is very different from the culture, the Western culture. And why is there a need to go there to create and to help with community? Is it because of the colonization? Is it because, like, how has that experience been?
So, yeah, I think one thing that is very important to understand, first of all, when we talk about Africa is a huge continent with very different situations inside of it. And my personal experience has been with Senegal, because Damanhur has a twinship with Guédé-Chantier in Senegal. And in 2016, actually we brought, because, they have malnutrition in the Sahel area for many, many months of the year. And they have an overproduction of vegetables when there is the rainy season. So when they came here, they saw how we make pickles and tomato sauce. And so I went with a really, really handy woman from Damanhur, with Pelicano. I went to Guédé-Chantier, and we had a workshop for food conservation, which also allowed the women to have an income afterwards to sell the products on the markets. It allowed areas that did not have any fresh food and any nutritious food, and for many, many months to have nutritious food. And it brought together different communities and different villages, because in the beginning it was supposed to be for 12 women from Guédé-Chantier, and at the end there were 55 women from 5 different villages, because the voice spread. And it was really beautiful. And in 2018, we went the second time, and this time we went with 8 Damanhurians. And it was very beautiful. And we went not only to do a workshop for food conservation, but we also planted, together with the people from 3 different villages in the Sahel area and around Guédé-Chantier, we planted 1,600 fruit trees. And that started a whole process of also creating and having a nursery for trees, So banana trees, I mean, I don't remember now all the different trees that we planted, but it was really like all fruit trees, exactly, all kinds of fruits. And they had, in some villages, they had 90% of survival because the women and the children took care of it. It's really very interesting to see the different societies. And one thing that we brought with us from Africa and especially from Senegal is that you're never alone. There is still a concept of society which is so interconnected. Nobody is left alone. Nobody is left alone. And that, so, I mean, in the complete poverty, but the people are so happy and have so beautiful smiles. And we learned a lot. So we brought some things and we came back with others, because we always think that we are such a good community, and I think we are. But still we have so much to learn, and especially in Africa and in South America, a lot of the social connections are still very, very strong and really working. So I think we really don't want them to go through the separation that we have lived in the Western world to go to the new world. They can go directly to the new world.
This is a little bit like, I remember coming from Sweden. I know that Sweden was one of the poorest countries in Europe at the time when, you know, where there was Rome and France and Germany, but it was very poor. They only had nature practically. But then with the World War II, One and Two, they didn't participate. And then there was this concept of being biological, innovative in that field. And there was no gap, because in Sweden there had never been the kind of cultivized society, so they could make the leap in those innovations and go directly from in this ecological point of view. Then of course now Sweden is not an ecological country now when looking at also from an eco-village point of view, but they had many steps ahead because they didn't have that kind of civilization that was in the middle and in the south of Europe.
Exactly.
So it's similar.
So I think really there is a great opportunity, and of course it's a great struggle, because it looks like our Western way of living is so appealing. But actually I think there is a great opportunity to step directly into the new, because the new means to be in harmony with nature, to regenerate our nature, because we have that's our only possibility of survival.
Yeah.
And I think we are not completely aware yet on what kind of effect it will have on our lives when climate change continues as it is going on, you know. So I think there are many possibilities, and I did a very beautiful work in the refugee camp in Kakuma in Kenya, where for over 2 years I have been teaching leadership and conflict resolution to a group of women who now have created inside the refugee camp a government for conflict resolution.
Oh, wow.
And the same lessons, they were also used to create an eco-village inside the Kakuma refugee camp. So now there's already more than 80 people that have been trained with this, and I'm very, very happy that sometimes with little you can do a lot.
Yeah.
It just takes good will. It takes good will, and it takes some energy, but you can do a lot. You can do much more than you think, you know.
Yeah.
So I think that was very, very important, and also to bring the experience that I have lived here in Damanhur into a refugee camp, where living together is really challenging, because there are so many different people from so many different countries with extreme traumas.
Yeah, of course.
And it's really difficult. But and then just recently I came back from Kenya, where I did an EDE, an Ecovillage Design Education course, together with a beautiful organization that is called the Nile Journey, that tries to recreate the connections between all the different countries along the Nile, where there's a lot of conflict. So they try to do it from bottom up with an eco-village approach, and it's really very beautiful. And so they invited me to come to teach in their EDE, and it was very, very touching, because to see really sometimes there are destinies and situations, and the resilience of humans and to get out and get over really, really challenging situations. Yeah. It's admiring. I admire a lot of people who are able to really overcome extreme trauma, you know. So.
And how do you work with that trauma and conflict resolution? Like, what is it? Do you have some key concepts that you teach that could be helpful also for people to have, even just if the key concepts for people in their own life, or people who are wanting to approach an eco-village or wanting to build their own, and know that they have things to work on, things that they can keep in mind, things that they can start working with?
I think the first thing to understand is that when you are triggered, it is always an old memory that is popping up and that is creating the film. Because we all know that, right? When we are triggered, we go into a loop. It's always the same story that unfolds, you know? And until it is not finished, you don't start to reason. You cannot start to reason. Afterwards, you can start to reason. And sometimes you cannot get out of this loop and you never start to reason. So to really become aware and ask yourself with curiosity, why is that? What is happening there? What is happening inside of me? Why is this happening? Where does it come from? And so that it can discharge the energy. And of course, I really advise people to do trauma work because on themselves, and to find somebody to do trauma work with, because it makes life so much easier.
Even for the little ones that you mentioned in the beginning, just like the little ones, someone said, "Oh, I don't have any traumas," but you know, perhaps the small things in your life that happen as a child.
If you are triggered, you have traumas.
Yeah.
So if you're triggered, you have traumas, you know? So if you're never triggered, then you don't have traumas and no need. But if you're triggered, then you have traumas.
Yeah.
And we don't want these things to become diseases, you know? Because very often when we suppress all our emotions and all our things, then something comes out of that. I mean, there is a lot of research going on, and the connection between how we treat ourselves and how we deal with ourselves, and what approach do we have to the world and diseases, especially such as cancer and other heavy diseases, you know.
Yeah, it's like, hello, something is coming up that pushes you to really slow down, sit with yourself and reevaluate everything, and perhaps then resolve the things that you haven't done before.
Exactly. So I think that's one thing, but also conflict resolution. You can solve conflicts only when you are able to see the other side. So one thing that is extremely important, and sometimes a third person of trust can be very useful, is to understand the other side. Because only if you understand the other side, it's possible to solve a conflict.
Yeah, of course. And how do you do that? Because sometimes you get so snowed in, you know, we say that in Sweden, you get snowed in. I don't know, probably it's not a concept in Africa, but you cannot get out of yourself, you know. How do you enter into the mindset of the other people? Even if you want, sometimes you can't, because you feel so triggered and you feel like, no, this is, you have done me wrong, you know. Do you have any exercise for doing that? I
think the exercise, there's a very beautiful exercise which is inspired by Arnold Mindell, who is one of the great people who created process work and who created deep democracy, and which is really to tell a story. Tell the stories, tell the conflict from one side, tell the story from another side. And then you need a facilitator, of course, make them swap seats and tell exactly the same story as the other person told with the words. Because only sitting in that place, it already creates a difference. You know, the American Indians, they say that, the American natives, they say that you have to walk in the shoes of somebody for at least 3 years before you, 3 days before you can understand that person, and I think there's so much truth in that.
Yeah. So you're creating like a discussion where you're argumenting from the side that you were in reality against.
Exactly. Yeah. Of course, it takes some exercise.
Yeah, but it's wonderful. It's wonderful.
Yeah. It really works.
Yeah,
it really works. I have seen solve conflicts that were in huge conflicts, and that you could really use. And the community. I mean, living in community and using the other people also to hear their opinions, to see what they think about it and not take it personal. Because again, when you take something personal, it's always linked to trauma.
Yeah.
So you see, below conflict, there is trauma. So you have to look at the two things. Sometimes you have to look at the conflict resolution, but very often the conflict resolution always also touches upon things that are linked to trauma. And so I think it's very important that we really become aware that we live in a wounded society, and that we all have our wounds, and that everybody has their wounds. If everybody has wounds, there's nobody who is better and who is worse. And there's no things that are more important than others, because when you are wounded, your wound is very important.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, that is beautiful. That's a beautiful way also in accepting others. I think that is. And so another thing that that I'm interested in also now in the world, there's this movement. Well, now in the last years, there's been a lot also on a global scale, a lot of conflict, of course. But there is a movement underneath all of this of people getting more interested again in moving out from the cities, going to the countryside, even with some friends, creating eco-villages, creating community. There is this grassroots movement that is growing, but people have very little guidance in this, because now, especially in our Western society, we are so used to having from above a government and so on. What are the first steps that you think are the most important for people who feel that they want to take the leap, but they don't really know how, when, what, they're in this middle stage where they don't really have the courage to take the leap to create something or to join something?
I think the first thing to do is really to go visit different places. So to get a personal feeling. Because one thing is the mind and another thing is personal real life experience, where you feel things, in your gut. I think the gut feeling is something that is extremely important and highly undervalued. The gut feeling is something that teaches us a lot, and there we can learn a lot. Then we have all these big networks, which is the Global Ecovillage Network, which is the FIC in the States, which is very active. And the Global Ecovillage Network has its parts, like the local, the national, and the local and the regional parts in every part of the world. So you can really get a lot of information. Do an EDE, an Eco-Village Design Education course, where you learn a lot about community. We have in Damanhur, we have a beautiful course, how to create a successful community, that I'm also a teacher of. And I think, which is a very concrete, if you're already there wanting to create a community, then that's a really good course as well, because it really allows you to get a lot of very practical tools. While the Eco-Village Design course is very, very all comprehensive. It talks about the social, it talks about economy, it talks about ecology, and it talks about worldview. So it touches upon all the different parts with a lot of exercises, and it's a 1-month course, so a very long course.
And how do you see that? Because there are the communities around the world that have this very big, like similar to the ED, also as Damanhur is, it's almost like its own little society with its own government, with its own worldview, with its own movements, with its own economy. And then there are smaller ones. Like, what do you see the differences in from big ones like this and smaller ones where you might have 10 people living together? What are the pros and the cons? Because I know that you have visited so many different places.
I think there is a huge difference between like a community where there are hundreds of people and a community where there are like 20 or 30 people. Because, the community life in itself really happens in the small communities. So also in Damanhur, for example, we live in our nucleos, which are groups of people that have a house and a territory, and from 7 to 25, 30 people, they live together. And that's where the social part takes place. And this takes place in smaller communities as well. So the real community exchange takes place a lot. Now, in a bigger community, you have a lot of possibilities to go also out of you don't have only the community. So when the community becomes small, you have the possibility to also to change your nucleo, to go into a different community, because we have a federation of communities where we are 4 communities.
Yeah.
So you can change really things without going out of the whole of the community. And that allows a lot of more freedom. But so there are different things to it. And a society, I think also the processes are exponential in a big community, because you have many more interactions on different levels, and a whole society is created. Actually, big communities are like new societies. We should call community the smaller ones, and we should call the big community not community but society. But I mean, because that's the function that it's creating.
Yeah, of course.
And the interactions that are being created.
And I'm thinking about economy, because there's a lot of people, a lot of questions that I get, and I don't know if you get the similar ones, is that eco-villages, intentional communities, that people tend to live in poverty, that there is a sense, okay, I don't want to go there because then I will live in poverty, or the fact that, okay, then how will I earn money, because you're actually stepping out in some sense from the current society. How is that managed? Like, how have you seen that this is true, that there is poverty from a Western standard in communities? How would you, and is there a possibility for those communities to manage their economies in different ways? Like, what do you get trapped? These are questions that I get a lot from people, also for myself.
I would actually challenge this assumption a lot.
Fantastic.
Because I think the opposite is true.
Yeah.
Because in communities, because people put together things, maybe you have less free money to buy everything that you want to buy. Maybe you have to think a little bit more whether you buy something or not. But on a global level, only if I look at Damanhur or at other communities, we have such a richness. We live like very rich people, not having so much money in our pockets, but we live like, and there is other levels of richness. There's other values, like the trust. How do you value trust? How do you value being able to bring up your children in a place where you don't have to be worried that everything happens to them? All kinds of things can happen to them. And in a community, it's really safe. It's really, really safe. And the trust that you have, that when you're really down and on your knees because somebody died in your family, because you lost your work, and so on and so on. So there's always somebody that you can lean on. There's always the others that hold you. There's a solidarity net that holds you. How do you value that? And how do you value the exchange with people on a level that goes always beyond surface, or not all the time deep talks,
but
and
almost
so on.
always.
But
this is the thing that I get. Yes,
a lot.
This is something that I get from some guests, coming to the coffee shop and then end up in talking to someone, and they just feel, is it possible that that I can meet someone at the coffee house and actually have these deep conversations with, even if it's only 10 or 15 minutes over a coffee.
Exactly.
So, yes.
And the thing that you really look for, try to understand what is life, and that you're open to explore it. So, I mean, this is a richness that you cannot pay for.
Yeah, of course.
So there is, and there are 100 more, but I cannot even think of them.
Yeah.
But there is so many reasons in which I feel that we are extremely rich.
Yes.
And people can work. I mean, people, sometimes it's very good if people have good professions, that they keep their professions, so that they don't leave their professions. Yeah. But if before you were doing a work that is not worth it, then maybe you can find that you were not really attached to. Yeah. Then you might find a much better work inside of a community, you know?
I think this is something in my own experience. Coming to the community from an economical point of view, well, I came here and I had like 800 euros in my bank account, and I had left my home, and I had no idea, even if I was gonna stay here. So I was really, at the edge of, I don't know, selling jewelry at the beach. But I really used that actually. For me at the time, the realization that the freedom of doing something meaningful, of living a meaningful life, was more richness than actually doing something. It allowed me to entering into community. And I think that communities are wonderful hubs to allow you to do work exchange while you're figuring yourself out.
Exactly.
So this is something that you don't have in society outside, because you give so much time to a work that is killing your soul if you're not, of course, happy with your work. But in community, when you enter and you have the possibility to do work exchange for a couple of hours and anyways have people, and then you have the aspect that you were speaking about, that people are seeing your talents. So in my case, for example, people were seeing the fact that I was good at doing videos, and they were pushing me to create something, and they were offering me to use and to train myself in those skills. And through that was something that I could build a profession on, even though I had thought that it was something fun, but I'd never seen it in that point of view. So this is really something where I think that it can really allow you, communities can allow you to have the time to really figure yourself out, to create something that is meaningful and sustainable for you in the long run.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I totally agree with all that you said.
Yes.
And exactly, communities offer you a lot of possibilities. Mm-hmm. And also to try out to stay for a while, both with work exchange or with really contributing in a very little way, just for the expenses. So if you really want to figure it out for yourself, what is going on in your life. Yeah.
And how do you see this? Because I feel a lot, we were speaking about the Damanhur is a spiritual community, and there is a connection with actually the communities that have been the longest standing. They have a spiritual root. Why do you think that is so important? Because this is something that many people, but I don't want to be, spiritual. I just want to, grow my own vegetables. But why do you think that having something that is spiritual, why is that example something that we see is something that lasts for longer periods?
It is mainly true, but it's not only true, because there are some ecological, some people because it's about the ideal, as I said before. It's about a high ideal. So usually spiritual communities, the high ideal is given by the spirituality, which is, again, this polar star that you will never reach, but you can always touch upon, that you can always sense, that you can always move towards and experience. So spirituality also is very all-comprehensive. So, if you are spiritual, if you have a deep respect for life, so how can you not be ecological?
Of course.
But also some communities that are political or that were really linked to ecology, they have a very long level of survival. Or social experiments, like Tamera or Zeg.
Yeah.
There are many, many different ones. And then I agree that it's easier for spiritual communities to create this glue amongst the people. It seems to be easier. Mm-hmm.
Does this have to do with, because also, as you said, now spiritual, the definition of spiritual is many, but the idea that when we speak about spirituality in Damanhur, we speak about respecting and being connected, interwoven with life. And also anything that you give meaning to is spiritual, because you give life to something that you give meaning to. That's basically it. So, and that feels that it's very connected also to the movement and the ancient societies. I say ancient when I also speak about indigenous people, because they also have this concept of that life is sacred, and that is, of course, spiritual. And so there's this this sense of wanting to go beyond yourself, of wanting to live to the fullest this life, with the knowing that it's not that important in the end, And do you think this can help also when it comes to conflict resolution, when it comes to living together with people?
Of course, because if you take yourself completely serious, then it's very difficult to solve conflicts. It's very difficult to look at your triggers, because you believe your story. If you're completely identified with the story that you're telling yourself, then it's more difficult to look at the other side, because you believe only in your side. So of course, I really like also this parallelism that you just made between indigenous peoples and communities, because I really think that communities are the new indigenous people. I think we are very, very similar in a certain sense. We have a lot in common. We have our own culture, and indigenous people do have their worldviews that are an enormous glue, you know,
culture,
as we have our worldviews, you know. So I think it's really very, very important to have a very strong worldview, and I think it's the worldview that at the end creates really the glue, which is this big ideal that I was talking about before. And in communities, especially in spiritual communities, there is this wanting to explore, as you said, life as its fullest, at its fullest. So to really explore all the essence of life, you know. I think we all feel that life has something, that life is something that is very specific and very particular, and to understand something about the essence of life. What is the essence of life? And to want to understand that allows you to become much wider, because you don't identify only with your little story in the moment when you're wounded, but you are able to look at things in many, many different ways, and you know that there is something beyond. I mean, all indigenous people talk about something beyond, you know. Of course, yes. So I really believe that that spirituality and the sometimes in Damanhur we call it the sense of the divine, which is really like there is a sense inside of human beings that also have the need to create something sacred, also in very political and very down to earth ways, but still you create like something sacred, something that you give a really important meaning to. So it's sacred. It's something that is not to be touched. You know? So.
Do you have something from your personal life that has been a moment, or in some kind of situation where you have seen really a conflict resolution, or something that really, really touched you, that made you make, you know, an own personal leap that you could share?
Yes. I especially one conflict resolution that I had here in Damanhur between two people that were in really strong tensions for over a year, and the whole nucleo called me to help them to solve that conflict, and it was amazing how at the end something that came out was completely unexpected. But the reason why one person had such a strong tension and aversity towards that other person was because of a childhood wound and conditioning. But it would never have come out if we didn't have the talking, and they could not talk to each other because they were triggering each other so much. So they could only say he could only talk about the person in the third person, not in the direct way to talk. And they would always talk through me, and the whole nucleo was around. So it was also a very touching nucleo experience where everybody then afterwards at the end brought their experience, and it made me realize how much it is true that when there are things that really, really trigger us, it is always our personal story. It is always our personal trauma. So we don't have to believe in everything. You know, we don't have to believe in everything. So
beautiful.
Yeah.
I think one last question is to go to end it in a world scale. What do you see for the future? Like if you would project your perfect future, your perfect scenario for, let's say, the next 100 years, how do you see that with the experience that you have had of this life?
I think that if we want to survive as human beings, we have to live in community. And this does not mean that you have to go out of the city to live in a community. You can really try to create community in the place where you are. But I really feel like we need to live together with like-minded people, where we can share things and where we can have solidarity nets, because we don't know what this future is bringing. For sure, if we are together with others, this is the reason why the human beings started to live together, because it created safety. It created a better possibility for survival. And we are wired to live together. Our brains, we are wired. Our neurological, our neurons are wired to want to live together. So all the separation that has been created in this last century in the Western world is very artificial and very unhealthy. And it shows in many, many things. So I think really to create community wherever you are, with your friends, with the people around you. If you are living in a specific place, maybe you want to move and change, and even in the city you want to move to a different place where there are more like-minded people. But to create something together and to create services and things that you do together, like simple exchange things, like also in Transition Town they do that, you know. They have places where they exchange their clothes for free, and the books and children clothes and children things and things in general, so that we are not only dependent on the consumistic society that we are living in, but that we can have exchanges and that we don't have to buy everything. Like going back to indigenous principles, because they are completely intact.
Yeah. Okay. Well, so going back to the indigenous, so actually going back to the human roots, and from there, like shooting also with innovation and with things.
With
but
innovation,
we need to have the solid base of those roots and those that knowledge, that wisdom before we do that, because otherwise we're disconnected.
Exactly. And I really do believe in innovations. So I think that innovations, and especially all the things that are linked to renewable energy, I think that we can really do so much to discharge the charge that we are putting on our planet, and that we still can change some things. And on the other side, we have to adapt to the climate change that will come. So we need to find new ways, and if we are on our own, it's not possible. Then we will perish. So I think it's very important to really create community in order to be able to face also the future that is going to come. And innovation is something that is human, and it's beautiful, but we have to find a way to be in harmony also with the innovations.
Of course. Yeah. Okay, wow, thank you so much for this talk. It was very enlightening. I will also leave everything that you said in the bio, in the description below. So for people who are interested in all the different courses or who want to create communities, and they can have your contacts and have also all the links to the different courses, and also to Jen and to Fik, and to see, you know, wherever they are, how they can create more community where they are.
Wonderful.
Okay.
Thank you for doing such great work, Celestina.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.